I recorded my half of that whole beginning.
I actually did too.
Okay. So it's possible. It's possible.
But I don't know if I want to tell everybody about that stuff.
But you didn't even say who you are. You're just talking about CD
I know,
Baby.
but still.
Like they start searching through CD Baby, like I wonder.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Well, because I think our Instagram account says, it says two people that are definitely not affiliated.
Yeah, I know. I was actually going to talk to you about that. I don't know how I feel about that. It sort of just blows our cover. Also, it's funny because nobody follows us on Instagram.
Right.
Oh, we had a funny comment.
Did we? Wait, where?
On YouTube. I assume you saw it because I didn't thumbs it up. Somebody on our account thumbs it up. But it's just funny because it was like, I like the podcast, but let's put aside our prejudices of monarchy. It's the best system.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
I wanted to be like, Curtis Yarvin, is that you? That's funny. Yeah. We appreciate you listening.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I mean, I didn't really want to.
Well, but the thing is, you post it every week on your Instagram.
Well, on the story. Also, I might stop doing that now that you've started pushing it elsewhere, because I honestly think that's what's actually helped grow the listenership.
Okay.
I mean, what you're doing is definitely
But I put it on my Facebook and stuff. Do you want me not to tag you or anything?
Yes, thank you. But I think it's the Reddit stuff you're doing.
Maybe.
I don't know. I get the impression, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess the easy experiment would be to not do one of them this time. And
our listenership is pretty. It's not like.
Hey, you have to start somewhere, Antushka. Okay,
right.
Mr. Pessimist. I mean, honestly, I'm not.
Mr. Pessimist. I like the Mr. At least it's respectful.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, if we, it's fine, whatever. We can get off this topic. And then we were talking about streaming before, but that's boring. Who wants to talk about that?
Boring.
Streaming, boring.
The only thing I like talking about with streaming is that I don't think that it makes any sense that anybody gets paid for a stream. Well, just like the whole intellectual property business of it makes zero sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does seem to be, it's like, and this is actually kind of a good segue into the, Anarchist Handbook, which we'll be talking about.
Yeah, because we're talking anarcho-capitalists this week.
Right.
Anarcho-capitalist.
Right. And this will be our last installation. We'll be talking about Murray Rothbard.
Never again.
David Friedman. And then we're off of it forever. Yep.
You're so excited.
I've successfully convinced Antushka to renounce his anarchism and to come back to governing bodies of all kinds.
So I thought this week was actually the best. I was a little worried, and maybe you have a different thing. I think the Anatomy of the State is such a well-written essay.
Yeah, it's well written. It's certainly better written than David Friedman.
Yeah, Friedman's writing isn't that great. I kind of like that he addresses sort of like the main issues that everybody talks about with anarchy, but
he didn't do a very convincing job.
I agree. It's a little weak. I think Murray Rothbard is like, I don't know, to me it's the pinnacle of anarcho-capitalism and explaining the concept.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I could see that. I still disagree with it, but I agree that it was maybe one of the most cogently laid out arguments.
Well, that's good. To
get back to Spotify real quick, I mean, for me, I look at just the streaming method or the subscription model, you could say, as just the logical thing to develop out of the Napster issue.
Right.
I mean, it's like it was like they had to come up with some system, and I feel like they tried different types. I mean, Bandcamp exists, right? Mm-hmm. You can use Bandcamp. I have Bandcamp. I'm sure you do.
Right.
But that's not where I get most of my revenue. I mean, I don't get a lot of revenue, but I get most of my revenue from streams, actually.
Right. I do not. I get most of my revenue from live shows, but
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and I would if I did live shows. Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, the amount of revenue I get from streams is essentially nothing.
Right. No, but I mean, and that was going to be what I was going to say sort of before we started recording, though, and what we were talking about is the thing that I've been doing has made it so it's not a lot of money, but it is at least some regular amount of money every month, which is, nice.
That's cool. I mean, I think all that stuff is great. I just don't think it actually makes sense. I think it's kind of a stupid system.
No, I agree. And I would be a lot angrier if it was a thing that I was trying to do to survive. It's like, right. I'm doing this as a hobby and I'm just like happy to have anything. So
right.
My opinion's not really valid in this setting. Honestly, when we're comparing it to like somebody like you, you're trying to actually make a living off of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's fair. But it's just, the reason I think it leans into the anarchism stuff is a lot of what these arguments rely upon, especially David Friedman's, I think are assumptions against what are natural sort of tendencies of our species. And we started talking about this last week as well. Mm-hmm. But it's like, it's not clear to me that monopoly isn't a natural tendency. And so we'll start with, I guess, if you want, David Friedman's essay, where he's basically offering up an explanation or an argument against the idea that, you can't have an anarchist society that could defend itself because it couldn't have, a national army.
Right, he's talking about public goods.
Yes, yes, exactly. A public good. And so he gives up a bunch of examples of how you can have public goods from individuals, stateless individuals. But it's all of these things, all of the examples he had always came back to this idea that you would have a lot of agencies. Yes, you'd have a lot of competition. It all came back to that. And he never, in my opinion, gave a good argument for what would prevent a monopoly in all domains.
Well, I mean, competition is what prevents a monopoly. I would say that competition and monopoly both exist in nature, but I would say that most ecosystems, and I don't even just mean when we're talking about money. I mean, if you look at a forest, that is a highly competitive system.
It is, but it's less diverse than it's what's your definition of diversity, I guess? And by this I mean, what's your threshold for diversity of how many different types of things do you need to have before you call it diverse? Obviously more than one, right? If you just have an apple.
Diversity is a spectrum, right? So 2 is more diverse than 1, 4 is more diverse than 2.
Right. So what I'm saying is that you could look at a jungle as actually not as a bunch of monopolies, as an organism, a species is kind of a monopoly within that specific biological niche.
Right.
And so that's my point, is it feels like monopolies are a natural tendency, even within the jungle example. You bring it up, but I'm just telling you that you're not looking at it, I guess, from the right perspective. Monopolies exist within
in a jungle.
Yes, despite the fact that there's... It's like if you're looking at it on the level of species, monopolies very much exist. Like humans, we're a monopoly of the Homo sapiens, I guess, or whatever the genus, I guess you could say. And birds, I guess. I don't know. This is
so Jaguars are a monopoly of Jaguars.
Exactly.
So what I meant is, if you zoom out from there, Jaguars are in competition with all sorts of other things. And mushrooms are in competition with other funguses and grass and trees and ants and everything. Everything that's existing in an ecosystem is in competition, seeking to serve its own species or colony or whatever.
Right. But monopolies exist within all of these, depending at the level that you look at them. Like,
well,
for
would
instance,
you say an individual is a monopoly?
Phosphorylation, there's a monopoly that's developed. Or carbon-based life, there's a monopoly that's developed. It's like,
well, what are the other types of life?
Non-carbon-based, silicon-based, we're not familiar with those.
Well, does it make sense to say something is a monopoly if there isn't another option? So
no, but that's why my question was. That's why I started this off by asking, what's the definition of diversity? How many do you need? Right. How many do you need? Competitive species do you?
Well,
need?
I don't know if you need diversity. You need competition.
Right, and sorry, yes, but I guess I take that to mean. I guess I was taking those to be sort of the same, but you're right. That's a little.
I think
bit,
diversity is downstream
difficult.
from competition.
Yeah, no, it's difficult. It's imprecise.
Probably competition breeds diversity. Probably, because if you're competing, you're going to want to find differences.
Right, exactly. Yeah, which is why I was sort of thinking of them as synonymous, but yeah, no, I realize the argument sounds kind of stupid. Like you said, the Jaguars, a monopoly of I think that might be the name of the episode.
Yeah.
I'm coming in hot talking about how stupid these people are, and then I'm talking about the Jaguar has got a monopoly on Jaguarism.
Yeah, no one else gets to be a Jaguar.
Yeah.
Unfair. Yeah.
But I mean, or look, like Neanderthals used to exist, right? And we've sort of congealed into whatever it is that we are now, right?
I think it's important to separate being from action. It's a little bit of a tricky distinction, but I think when we're talking about monopoly, I think it makes more sense when we're talking about undertaking some action or trying to achieve some goal. So saying that I have a monopoly on me is sort of meaningless. It's like...
It's pretty funny, though.
Right. It's very self-affirming. It's great.
Yeah.
You do you, boo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Go on. Yeah.
No. But I think that where this conversation becomes relevant is when we're talking about doing something like a market force. When we're talking about a market, because a market has to do with interaction rather than just being. And Jaguars don't have a monopoly on predatory interactions.
See, I think that being inherently has interaction with it, but we could get very philosophical about this.
I think at its root it doesn't,
precise enough.
like math or something like that. So the idea of math, I think, at least arithmetic, is a true statement of being. 2 + 2 = 4. You're saying that this is a thing, and all you're saying that this thing is what it is, and it isn't interacting at all.
But it's an interaction of ideas to make that. It's an interaction of the idea of 2 plus the interaction of another idea of 2 becoming something, which is...
Well, it's not even saying it's becoming, right? It's saying it literally is. There's no difference, right?
Well, it just depends because you have to put them together. There is
just
an
a different way of saying the same
no, but
thing.
but there's an act of joining them together. They are separate entities, and then you do some kind of joining, which is what the plus sign means, as opposed to a minus.
Right.
So, anyway, all I'm trying to say is you said let's talk about the difference between being and interacting.
Right,
I'm saying being has interaction built into it. Sorry.
I think in the practical, yes, and I think in theory, the state of being doesn't necessarily involve interaction, depending on whether or not you believe in. If you believe in the objectivity of existence, versus if you believe that existence is predicated on everything else confirming your existence.
Yes. Sorry. Well, so why did you want to make this distinction? I guess just let me understand why because we were talking about
I don't think it makes sense to talk about monopolies with respect to individual units. I think monopolies only make sense with respect to interactions.
No, but this is why
Jaguars don't have a monopoly on predatory behavior. How Jaguars interact in the ecosystem, there's other predators.
But that's why I keep asking you about perspective, which is really what I mean to say is scale. So what scale are you looking at it at? It's because, yes, I mean, which is why I was saying at the scale, which is like the scale, the species level, the scale of the species level versus like the scale of the kingdom. Right. Which is when you if you start looking at the scale of the kingdom, then you can start seeing the monopolies such as oxidative phosphorylation as an energy mechanism that is found within all of these types of life. So it depends on the scale that you're looking at if you want to find the monopoly. And that's my point.
What is the monopoly you're saying, I guess?
The monopoly of a monopoly being just a multitude of things, I guess, that under one banner. And so in this case, the one banner would be the banner of being metabolically like one way. You know, like we're all going to use oxygen and as our method of respiration, versus those other people that use substrate level phosphorylation. You know, so it's like it's monopoly. I'm being loose about it, but I'm just being loose in the sense that it's like you have a bunch of things doing the same thing, which is what it feels like is what a monopoly inevitably does. The monopoly of Amazon gets, I guess a bunch of people getting like the same the packages from the same company, right? It's establishing some uniformity is what a monopoly does. So you could disagree with that, but that's sort of
how I disagree with it. I think I don't fully understand. I think I'm not even I'm not quite where you are, so I don't know if I disagree.
Yeah, it's just think about like what did Standard Oil do? Think about
what did Standard Oil do?
They formed a trust to lock out a bunch of competitors by conspiring with the railroad people to get lower
like a cartel
rates
or something.
Yes, exactly, to get lower rates on shipping. Thus, they were able to push out smaller competitors who didn't have the same connections. So, again, it's just
now, I agree that.
So now you have getting at what the monopoly is. Again, it's just like the monopoly comes from the fact that people are all receiving something from one entity, so they're all unified in that sense. So that's why I keep getting to this unity.
Even the example that you just gave, I think where I see the distinction and where I'm confused about the second thing you said is the first thing makes sense to me. That's obviously monopolistic behavior because the monopoly is the action. The monopoly is not the state. When I say the state, by the way, we're talking about anatomy of the state. I don't mean like die Staat. I don't mean the government. I mean a state of being.
Yeah. Yeah.
A monopoly is a type of behavior, maybe, in my mind, versus a way to be.
But see, this is where it's just like, I'm like, what the hell is the difference? Sorry, pardon my French. But like behavior and to be, it's like being is behavior in many ways.
Well, so I guess it depends. Do you believe in action, in human action? Do you believe in that humans make decisions and act, or just sort of like robots, doing an algorithm?
Yeah.
Because then being and action don't really have any distinction.
No, I know. No, I'm not a determinist.
Right.
So no, I don't think that. So I'm just wondering, I think this is important. I'm wondering if we should table it, introduce the topics a little bit more, and then we'll probably just naturally come back to it. Because, like, technically we've just
This kind of reminds me of that old Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson podcast.
Yeah.
I'm kind of getting that vibe.
Yeah, where they're just bantering about, like, word definitions. And,
right.
Yeah. So I agree. Because, I mean, you look at monopoly definition, right? It just depends on what your definition is. The exclusive possession, maybe that's what you're getting at, like it feels like an action, the possession or control of the supply of or trade in a commodity or service, right? So
I think that's decent. It's a little bit specific. It's a little bit more specific than I would go, but yeah.
Right, which is why I was sort of saying, like, I am using a very general definition here when I say, like, oxidative phosphorylation as a monopoly, but it's just the idea of certain things in nature do seem to get picked up on and copied by a lot of different things. And why can't we look at government, for example, as an example of that? Or why can't we look at consolidation of everything as examples of that?
I mean, I have several points.
Yes. Sorry, I'm sorry. And I said, hey, we should table this.
All right, let's table it.
Do you want to respond? I should give you the opportunity to respond to it, though.
But we're just going to keep going. It's
okay. All right. Thank you for being the bigger man and letting us go on. I would have responded. No. Okay.
Well, you can respond.
No, I'll respond to myself. You're an idiot. Okay.
I kind of think we should tackle Rothbard first.
Yes.
I think it's a much more interesting essay, and it's a more important essay.
Yes, agreed. I'll let you. Do you want to like summarize it?
I mean, it's a lot. It's hard to summarize all in one. The state is bad.
Yeah. How about what's his? He offers two definitions of the state. So he offers a first definition of the state, which I thought was interesting. Briefly, the state is that organization in society which attempts to maintain a monopoly of the use of force and violence in a given territorial area. In particular, it is the only organization in society that obtains its revenue not by voluntary contribution or payment for services rendered, but by coercion. So I thought that was a fair point. But then he sort of modifies it with this guy's Oppenheimer. He does this on 286. The state. Oh yeah, so I should say, and that last one was 284.
Okay.
The state, in the words of Oppenheimer, is the organization of the political means. And so the political means, as he defines previously, you have kind of two things, two ways of acquiring wealth, production and seizure, which you could also call economic and political. So the production is the economic means and the seizure is the political means. And so the state is the organization of the political means. It is the systematization of the predatory process over a given territory. So I thought that those were good definitions, to be perfectly honest. I didn't disagree with those definitions.
So actually, so what I'd be interested in doing is, because I think you said you don't agree with it. I would be interested in going through what it is you don't agree with. Because I feel like right off the bat, it's interesting that you agree with, or at least you can get behind to a point those definitions of the state, because I think right off the bat he loses 75% of his audience with that, because most people I think are either don't agree or very uncomfortable with the idea that the state is essentially a thieving organization.
Yeah, I mean, David Friedman makes this point too. It's true. It's like you don't have the opportunity to say no, So, yeah. But I sort of get at it from the other point that we keep sort of getting back to, of like, it's the idea that there's going to be monopolies in every facet of life, and having one monopoly that you at least can elect to combat the other monopolies that come forth is sort of the purpose of the government.
Right.
So it's like, yes, you don't have a choice, but you do if it's democratically elected, which is why sort of the Enlightenment birthed democratic ideals.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're rational beings, Antushka.
I mean, and then the problem with democracy is that whatever the tyranny is, like you can just vote to kill all the Jews, and if that's what most people want to do, that's what you do.
Right.
Unless you don't like democracy. Unless you say you can't, then you can't do that. And then you have some other principles that are outside of democracy.
But here's the interesting thing is what democracy has elected to kill a group of people. Because it's like the Nazis
Germany.
They didn't elect to do that. They didn't hold an election.
They did hold an election. They voted Hitler in a
yes, but no, but you said it was a secret that they were doing that.
Oh, the Jew killing thing.
Yes,
I see.
Yes,
and
that's the point.
The war and the persecution of the Jews had widespread support in Germany.
Yes, but taking people to gas chambers is definitely different, and the fact that they kept it a secret, I think, tells to the fact that they knew that there would have been public outrage.
It was too brutal for the population. Sure.
Yeah. Why would you keep it a secret?
I don't know. I mean, but there's lots of things that have not been kept secrets or lied about. But yeah, it's true.
Yes.
So if everything is set to a strict vote, maybe like the gas chambers don't happen.
I think it absolutely would have been voted down. I have that much, you could say, faith in humanity. I really do. I do think that.
Right, but like it's not like what they wanted was, I mean, like all the political cartoons from around Berlin are Jews in shackles.
Yeah.
We need,
yes.
So they're in prison rather than being killed. I guess that's a little better.
Yes. I mean, I'm not saying it's good.
Right.
Right. So I want that to be clear.
Yeah.
I just want that to be clear. But yeah. So, okay. So you want to know what I disagree with? Well, so I think, let's see. So, like, and I agree with the idea that intellectuals are opinion molders and that they're basically used by the state to shape consent and to get the people to believe that the rulers have legitimacy. And, you know, the greatest danger to the state is independent intellectual criticism. I agree with that, which is why you see a propensity towards censorship for the state, which is why, you know, and this is why I think the founders of this country were, the U.S. were thinking about all of these things. And one of the best maybe principles that they offered in their writings was the idea of having opposite entities.
Right, there's checks and balances system.
Plays off it. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, he writes about that a little bit.
Yes. And I like the science is the new god of society to basically give legitimacy to the actions of the government. I agree with that. I'm just going through because
so I guess actually what I maybe if I press on some things that I think maybe you are thinking, maybe you can tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong.
Well, and I was just about to, I think, get there too. But yeah, if you want to, because I was getting to the point where he starts to talk about the judiciary.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's an important spot.
Yeah, but if you want to talk,
so what I'm interested in is actually a position like yours is interesting to me. Because it seems like you sort of agree with a number of the premises, but you fall on a different side, where you say, like, yes, yeah, maybe they are corrupt, maybe they are monopolistic. However, what I'm imagining is what you think is that this brand of monopoly would be better than an alternative where they don't exist.
I think it's naive to think that a completely anarchistic society wouldn't devolve into a government.
Right.
I think it's a natural tendency for us to do.
Why? A government meaning like...
Meaning...
Well, actually, what do you mean by a government?
meaning because it's a great question, because it's even when like David Friedman was writing, I was about stateless groups. I was like, you could call it stateless, but it's like, okay, you have a group of people that identify under one military order. It's like, what's not to stop them from then starting to develop rituals and then associating themselves as a group? And then that's my point. It just feels like we have a natural tendency to sequester ourselves into geographic locations under various ideologies, and then to pick a group of people to establish laws to dictate how we can interact civilly. And
I think that
and then it goes back. Sorry, but I'll finish. But then it goes back to that question of like, if you just have a bunch of companies, my feeling is one of those companies is going to just in time eventually outcompete the others and take over, which again is what the purpose of the government is as an elected monopoly. Okay, I'll stop talking. Sorry.
Well, I agree. The purpose of government, I don't know. I mean, I think the purpose of government is also a complicated issue, because I think the government serves multiple purposes depending on whose perspective you're taking. But I think there's also a bunch of different types of governments, and the modern state, like Marx's Die Staat, is pretty new. Yes. Like, that's not always. That's not even most of history. Do we have anything like that? I think that Rome is kind of an early version of that, and so that's pretty old. But I think that there's tons of examples throughout history of governmental systems that are quite different
than what we have today.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Yeah, and I would agree. And I think industrialization's, of course, the reason for that is because it changed the fundamental way our society functions. Just everything that happened since the factory was invented. But again,
I don't think it's just industrialization, though. I think there's also been major ideological battles over the last 250 years.
Yes. No, I mean, you're right. It just depends on what you want to put the focus on, and it's a chicken or the egg thing, right? Did the ideology cause industrialization? Did industrialization cause the ideology?
Right.
Yeah. It seems like industrialization, because you had democratic ideals in Greece, but you didn't have industrialization.
Right.
I don't know why. But yeah, I don't know. Okay, what are we talking about now?
Okay, all right. So maybe I'll try and do what I was trying to do before. Okay. So,
no, well, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So taking it kind of bit by bit, I'm curious to see sort of where the problems are in a more directed fashion.
It always comes back, I think, to this monopoly idea, because even when he starts talking about the judiciary, it's the problem so he starts talking about the judiciary, right?
Right.
And there's this paradox, and he brings up this guy, Professor J. Allen Smith, this other guy, I think the Supreme Court Justice Black. I don't remember what his first name was.
Right. He's talking about judicial review.
Right, because there was this question when the New Deal was coming up, when Professor Black was on the Supreme Court. I think so. Sorry, it doesn't really matter, but I just don't like saying things that are untrue. So I'm trying to see quickly if he says anything. It doesn't matter. Okay, I can't see that.
Okay.
Quickly, so who cares? So he's talking about how the New Deal's basically overstepping its constitutionality, and they didn't really detail what they had to do to get past this, but it ultimately came down to this idea that the Fed is the final check on itself, which is just a paradox. It's governing itself because
it's not even just the Fed. There's several branches or areas of the government that have no democratic check and have no check in other parts of the government.
Right. But then the answer to that is that no, the states are the check to that. And then Calhoun, this guy, brings up an even more, and he says no, even further beyond that it's like the individual, basically. Right. Or rather, no, I'm sorry.
So Calhoun has a scheme to try and battle this to a point to allow states to nullify federal rules that it feels are in violation of the states' rights.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got myself mixed up. Calhoun was the person to offer the idea that the states were the concurrent majority, the famous doctrine of the concurrent majority. If any substantial minority interest in the country, specifically a state government, so that's where the states are the check to the federal power. Right. And then it's Rothbard who's saying Calhoun's not going far enough. Right. It's actually should be the individual.
The individual is the sort of the extension of the minority. Yes.
Right. And so I agree with that in principle, but it comes back then where I disagree is the practical extent, because I feel like then we start to get into that territory of what is a true representative of an individual's interest, and can you ever have somebody purely acting on behalf of somebody? Can you really ever dictate a pure delegation to somebody?
Definitely not.
Yes, but it feels like all of the anarchist principles require you to be able to perfectly arbiter things to people, or whatever. Arbiter, what is not probably not the right word. to specifically dictate things to people in a very precise manner, so that they represent you under very precise terms, and that they won't ever step outside of those bounds.
Anarchy is difficult. It requires a very, very high degree of personal responsibility, and it requires you to self-govern. And if that means communicating as best as you can with other people, that's what that means. That means that your life is nobody else's responsibility. That's the other side of it. So there's the side that, like you were arguing a couple weeks ago, came off as kind of whiny about saying like you can't tell me what to do. But the flip side of it is that ultimately we are all responsible for figuring out how to live our own lives. And David Friedman hammers on this more, but actually it's a big anarcho-capitalist point of view, is that community cooperation, human cooperation is necessary. And what a state does is it actually eliminates the need for humans to cooperate. So the more of a state, the more a state sort of trickles through society, the less responsibility people have, but also the less ability people have to self-govern.
Right, which is why...
And so it makes it harder to imagine. I think the problem is we're living in a world right now where it's very hard to imagine no state, because the state is everywhere. But if we were living on like the North Dakota frontier in 1870, there's no state anywhere.
I'm glad you brought the frontier up, because
I got you now.
No, well, I don't know if I got you, but it's a curious point, because that time, the 1870s, 1880s, the Wild West, was the same time Rockefeller was monopolizing the oil because of all the low regulations.
I disagree with that.
In the Wild West.
I don't think he's monopolizing because of the low regulations. He made deals with both the federal government and state governments. He was
he made deals. We just talked about this. Primarily, the way that he was able to monopolize was through the deals he made with the railroad companies, which was out of sight. And once the government found out, that's when all the big trust busting happened.
But the railroad companies were given huge grants from the government
to build their railroads. Yes. But not to offer low rebates to specific people. And so that's why it was a big scandal. Right. So that's my point, though, is in an unregulated landscape, you had a bunch of monopolies develop in the Wild West of America.
Right, but so we have to go to our Friedman. We have to go to our Milton Friedman for this. But yeah. I mean, none of the monopolies that came up, at least according to Milton Friedman, had anything to do with the free exchange of goods between people, and had everything to do with deals that rich people were making with the government. For instance, the entire Oklahoma system, where the state of Oklahoma took all the land away from the natives and then gave people land grants to go and grab land and stuff like that. None of this is anarchic. This is all essentially socialism with weird schemes.
Yes.
This isn't just there. It's the entire expansion movement involved the government with the homestead grants and stuff like that.
Yes. So this is why it goes back to this idea where there's always going to be that sort of nepotism, I think, and whatnot, and sort of insider dealing. But if it's within the government, at least it's an elected representative. I agree, though, we potentially are at a point where the bureaucracy has grown so large that it can potentially ward off any elected representatives, because it's just, how do you learn a system that's and so this gets into another point of thinking about natural tendencies that I was thinking about, of how I think that it also, the reason why anarchism won't work is for the reasons you keep bringing up, is it requires people to be very diligent. And I do think that, and I guess I don't know if it's nihilist, because I don't want it to sound like I am chiding humanity for this, but I do think that we have a tendency towards stagnation and it's not even laziness, but it's we want to do the same thing over and over again. We want to find something that we can do well, and then we just want to iterate. And this is why I'm being very lax with the idea of monopoly.
Right.
To be
but
just
also,
something,
who cares if that's what somebody wants to do?
No, but I'm saying that I think that leads into the ability, this tendency for people to want to do the same thing over and over again, leads to the monopolies forming, because they allow the people that don't stagnate to take over, because that's what happens.
Maybe there's a different way of framing the whole thing. So instead of arguing about the inevitability of governments, I think that there have been lots
you're
of
on to my whole plan. That's the whole plan. I frame it like that. That's right. I don't have an argument, Andushka.
But I think you and I probably live types of lives where we don't go around trying to control other people to high degrees, I would imagine.
No.
I think basically all it takes is most people to do that. I mean, really, that's it. It's really simple.
Yeah, but it's not. Because it becomes so complicated when you talk about specifics, which is the specifics.
What specific is complicated? It's complicated to dismantle a government.
We're going to get into the same conversations that we're already gotten into. It's about how whenever you have any kind of cooperation, you have delegation. And then when you have delegation, you have one person sort of controlling other people.
Yeah, but that's
grounds
right,
of
it's
that,
the same thing. This has nothing to do with that's not a government. That is not a system where somebody is forced into it.
No. Yeah. I know that, but we're talking about an anarcho-capital society where ostensibly a company is allowed to exist, right? because that's how everything's going to get done, right?
I mean, allowed isn't even a word that makes sense in that situation.
Okay, but you know what I mean. People are allowed to organize like that if they want to.
Right.
Because everything's allowed, because it's, yes.
Yeah.
Right. It's freaking anarchy, man.
Yeah.
And so, but that's why I'm talking about this. It's because I'm talking about, in that scenario, you're going to ultimately have coercion happen at some point.
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Every one of these essays says that coercion doesn't disappear because there's no government.
Okay. And what is to stop that coercion manifesting into a government is the point. Is like,
it requires people to be unwilling it requires people to be unwilling to accept coercion. So yes, it'll happen, but you can't accept it.
Yeah.
So I can't coerce other people, and I can't allow a system to go up that is coercing everybody.
Sure.
I mean, the harder problem is now, what do you do with the fact that there's the government there? That's much harder to get rid of than not starting a new... Like, that's the other thing. Just because there are hierarchies doesn't mean you have to build, a CIA and an FBI and a Department of Defense and a Department of Agriculture. You don't need any of that stuff.
Yes, and the problem is if you try to dismantle it, you have to do it through coercion, and you've thus become a hypocrite.
Yep.
So...
Exactly. This is the whole thing about like libertarians running for office, and the first thing they do is they fire everybody.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they are hypocrites. Right. So what do you do? I think the problem is you can't allow yourself to get stuck in a bad situation because you don't like how other people will think about you.
Right. Yeah. But actually, that gets to, was it Tolstoy or maybe it was Spooner? It might have been Lysander Spooner that was making the point about how power is basically, it was Spooner, within anybody who is willing to kill, basically.
Right. I mean, that's true always.
Right. And so that is another, I think, reason that government exists, is because it's the consolidation of the rational people in nature trying to fend themselves against the irrational psychopaths and animals, I guess you could say.
Right. I think if Amazon started doing things like the U.S. government, we would go crazy. We would think it was insane. If they started going around and they had a police force and they had prisons that just are Amazon prisons, nobody would think that was reasonable.
Yeah.
We wouldn't go like, oh, well, that's just the inevitable way of the world. Amazon has prisons.
Right. No, but I mean, it's again, you see some kind of order come up in every society. Haven't you seen Lost, Antushka? It's a microcosm of everything.
I guess my biggest thing is that I don't think that order and governments are tantamount. It's like I also don't think governments are naturally occurring things.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, yes. I think what you made a point I think it was last time, that I think is actually it's a decent complication that anything that humans make is natural to a degree because we are sort of naturally occurring. So from that perspective, I get that. But I don't think that governments are... I don't think it is the only way to organize people. For people to organize themselves.
Well, but this is, again... I say again so much. I got to stop doing that. Start tasing me every time I say it again.
Yeah.
But just a small vault.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to get crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to say the same thing, so it doesn't really matter.
So do you think that a government is legitimate or just inevitable?
Inevitable.
Okay, so you don't necessarily say it's legitimate, like a legitimate form of...
You could say inevitability is a form of legitimacy, I suppose.
Right. Sure. And then do you personally have a limiting factor on that? Because if you say it's inevitable, is there anything a government can do where you go, that's too far?
Yeah. Like, I believe in the, not supremacy of the individual, but the utmost almost supremacy of the individual.
So, okay, so what about like taxation? Is it too far to steal portions of somebody's labor from them? I mean, steal is a loaded word, but is it too far to I don't know, sequester, take?
No, I'm not against taxes.
Right.
It's just, I think what I always end up having an issue with a lot of this stuff is that it feels like all of the theories that want to just completely upend everything, I am always going to have an issue with, because I'm not that upset with the state of society. I guess that's just the reality. It's like, I think there's enough good with how things are that's worth preserving the fundamental structures, like the Constitution, right?
Right.
I know that's radical.
I mean, I wouldn't say that's a fundamental structure, but yeah.
Well, but it's fundamental because it would be a very shattering event to change it, And so but there is something to be said to sort of very slow change. It's like,
do you
the
feel
Roman
like
Empire,
it hasn't been shattered already?
What's that?
Do you feel like it hasn't been shattered already?
No, I don't feel like it's been shattered.
I feel like it's a completely irrelevant document.
Well, I guess I mean symbolically, as the rules and law of the U.S., I do still think that people generally follow the rules and the law of the U.S. So in that sense, I think it hasn't been shattered. That's what I meant.
Mm-hmm. But the Constitution, actually, it was the thing I didn't point out last week when we were talking about Lysander Spooner, is my biggest problem with his essay is he's talking so much about how the Constitution is not a legitimate document for individuals, to impose anything on individuals. Most of the Constitution has nothing to do with individuals. Most of the Constitution is imposing rules on the government that the government no longer follows.
I'm not as hyperbolic to say that it doesn't follow them at all.
I didn't say at all. I said most of which it doesn't follow.
Well, but it's like, what does that mean? Because it's like
Congress shall make no law, and then it makes a law. That means it's not following. Like it's such a strong no law. One law is not following that.
Okay, all right.
You don't agree?
No, I agree. It's just I don't know examples. I'm sure you know examples.
So like Congress shall make. So the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the right of freedom of speech, press, assembly, or speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. Right. So any law abridging somebody's right to speak is a law that is in violation of that amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging people's right to keep and bear arms. So any gun control, not even just gun control, weapons at all.
But no, you're missing. But this is why the Federalist Papers exist, because it was the idea that you have a scaffold, and then you have the interpretability of the scaffold, which is why I did try to sort of make an addendum to what I said to mean like the entirety of the rules and laws. Because, it's like you can't in one document write all the rules for the society, the details.
No. But it's writing rules you cannot make. It's putting boundaries that have been crossed.
Yeah, okay.
Is it that you don't agree? What's frustrating you about what I'm saying?
It's the idea that just because something's been crossed doesn't mean that the entire system should be thrown out. I guess that's it. It's like
I agree with that. That's not why I think the system
enough haven't been crossed, in my opinion, because I can't think of any.
But I just gave examples. Do you not believe that there's laws abridging like gun control laws?
No, there are, but I believe that context. I don't remember the exact writing of everything, but I believe context was provided in like the Federalist Papers to explain. Yes, I agree. The gun laws thing, just sure, okay.
I'm not saying that there should or shouldn't be gun laws. I'm saying when it says "shall make no law" and then you make a law, you are going.
I guess I
that.
just assumed that there was an asterisk or something, that allowed that to happen. Because if I would assume then that the Supreme Court would come in and But this
why?
is where there's what?
Why would you assume that the Supreme Court would?
Well, but this is where there's a social aspect to everything, which is probably good.
Mm-hmm.
And the interpretability aspect of the Constitution comes in, which is actually a good thing, because it's like as society changes, the Supreme Court justices will change, and thus how they interpret that will change. And you can have Supreme Courts overrule themselves, which is, I mean,
happens.
So that adds some flexibility to the system too, that I think is good. So that's my point, is having contradictions in the system doesn't mean, and so when you're asking, like, what's your issue with this? That's, I think, what I'm trying to get at is, like, you could bring up these examples, and I agree with, and so I don't want it to seem like I'm not saying that isn't a law that goes against the Constitution. You're right. That's an example. But it doesn't nullify the entirety of the civility that we've created, I think. And I fear the state of nature and disorder more, and I fear what unraveling the system would bring more than propagating what we have now and trying to fix what we have now, and also trying to accept the fact that, yes, there's some degree of autonomy that we're going to have to give up when we live in a society. And maybe, yes, that's why I keep going back to that idea of, like, maybe we could talk about having a geographic area for people that just want to go and just live out their wildest, state of nature dreams in anonymity and involuntarily going,
Right.
Nobody, no cameras.
Right.
But,
So
nobody's...
I am not saying at all that because lines in the Constitution have been crossed, we should get rid of the whole system. That has nothing to do with why I think we should get rid of the whole system. That's a separate argument that I think that the Constitution is essentially just words on paper that doesn't matter at all. Because if the people with the guns aren't following it, they're not going to follow it. There's nothing you or I can do to make them.
No, but it's the idea that the people that we elected decided it, or rather indirectly elected, I suppose.
Also, the we elected is a problem too. But yeah.
Well, yeah, right, because it's the Supreme Court justices obviously are appointed, but we elect the people that we think are going to. What's that?
And we don't necessarily, but some people might.
Well, if you vote in the presidential election, ostensibly, right, you're deciding
either you did or
person.
didn't vote for that person.
Yes.
And if you didn't vote for that person, it's also I have a hard time holding you responsible.
My point is that it is a major reason that people vote. That's all my point is. And so that's the reason, is that there is some feeling of control over that decision. And that's why it's talked about. Meaning that there is some kind of connection that, okay, they're not just unrepresentative of me. There are Republicans that can look at people on the Supreme Court and say, that person represents me, and there are Democrats that can say
But what's
that.
funny is that's actually, like, if we're talking about Federalist Papers and the Constitution, that's explicitly not how that's supposed to work. The judges are not supposed to be partisan at all.
They're not supposed to be partisan, but they are supposed to represent the various ideas in the populace, which I think they do.
I don't think they are. I think they're supposed to interpret the Constitution to the best of their ability. I don't think they're representatives at all.
Well, whether they explicitly said that, the founders said that they wanted the Supreme Court justices to represent the various opinions of the population, I would argue that that's what happens for the reasons that we just discussed, because over the years, presidents change, people change, the population's opinions change, and different people get put in.
Sure.
So that's why
another
it's
form
a
of
fluid
corruption.
thing.
Then,
no, it's what if you want to call it corruption, or you could call it just this. What do you mean corruption? Why is that corruption?
I would call it corruption because the reason that the Supreme Court are unelected is because they are not a representative. They are not representing the people at all. They are representing the Constitution, which is a government system. Like, the theory behind why the Supreme Court justices is not elected is they are not supposed to be representative of any political ideology.
No, but
other
it's
than
naive
the
to
itself.
think that people in a population aren't going to have opinions. So I agree that the ideal is that they're automata that are just robots that will only. But it's just that's not obviously not true.
Of course, it's not true. Yeah.
Yes. So that's my point, though, and that's why you have examples where it's a very human institution, which I think is okay. And that's my point. And you call it corruption, but I say it's a human. And so this is why you have 60 years later, a Supreme Court can overturn something that people felt 60 years before because the constituents change. And I'm not saying that it's representative necessarily, right? But I'm just saying that there are parts that are represented and that those parts are changing as the generations go.
Right.
And I think that is supposed to be how it works. But
I mean, the idea of judicial review wasn't even the original idea of the Supreme Court. So that any decision the Supreme Court made became the supreme law of the land. That was something added later.
See, I think the initial idea of the government was flexibility.
Okay. Like the U.S. government, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is why it's been able to last. And so that's why it's like if it seems contradictory, it's because it is flexible in a sense. And I think you can interpret it in different ways at different scenarios depending on how the population wants to interpret it. Right. And the population will interpret it that way regardless of logic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody, probably including the Supreme Court, is interpreting things through as much logic as they think they are.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say, as we sort of wrap up our anarchy stuff, I suppose, is that I think it's not paying enough attention to natural tendencies in biology. And I know you don't agree with that, but that is, I think, maybe where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
It's a monopoly idea. The idea about people, just some people basically being more of go-getters, and you could say almost sociopathic, and so the government's actually supposed to defend against the people that consolidate all that power, which would. And that's why I actually thought that the Machiavelli's Defenders of Freedom might be a good book to read after this, because it kind of talks about the Pareto principle and stuff, is the idea that like you have 20% of the people do 80% of the work and all that stuff. But yeah, you don't seem very happy with me.
No, I feel like we didn't really do this episode we didn't really like get into the chapters very well.
I did a very lightning summary as I was going through.
Yeah.
I mean, but I did sort of hit, I feel like, all the highlights of the anatomy. But I agree. We've been debating more this episode. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We also just didn't do that. It wasn't very directed. It was kind of all over the place.
Yeah, maybe.
Also, I have a very loud chair.
Oh. Well, that's the worst of all.
So here, one more point that I think is important that we brought up last time, that actually both Rothbard and Friedman get at a little bit, is the issue of liability. So I'm curious where you stand there, because I feel like a couple episodes ago, I think I remember, and maybe I'm misremembering, so don't let me put words in your mouth. That's just what I think I remember is you had suggested that you thought it was reasonable that like the head of the Department of Education has no liability for the decisions that department makes with respect to outcomes and things like that. And so what I said last time is I would like, when you were asking me what is the world I would like to see, I said in the short term, the first thing I would like to see is people all the way through society having the liability of their decisions on their own heads.
Yes. I remember talking about this. I remember reading about this now. I think it's come from its distributed liability, which is, I think, what Rothbard is missing, maybe, which is why the government, it's not necessarily right to say that the government can do no wrong, but it's that the liability for their wrong is distributed to everybody, and in that it becomes negligible.
Which because if you sue the government, you're sort of suing all of the American people.
Exactly.
When maybe it was the head of some department that made the decision that screwed you over.
Right. So, because that's what the government's supposed to represent, is it's supposed to be everybody. So that's why, yes, from one frame, it seems crazy, but from this frame, it's not. It's actually very logical that there'd be distributed liability to everybody, and that's why the head of the company might not necessarily. Well, so that's interesting, though. It's like it's not the company head versus a institute head is going to be different, right? If they're the head of a governmental institute, they will probably not go to jail because of the distributed liability of the governmental institute. Whereas if you're the head of a company and say, like 10 years ago or whatever, over that now 15 years ago with the salmonella outbreak in peanut butter,
you might go to jail.
And I think that's it. It just depends on. It's the reason is, I think, the government makes the rules, obviously, so it can't break the rules, and we are the government, so
why can we go to jail?
What's that?
If we're the government, we shouldn't get to go to jail.
Well, you have to be a representative of the government.
Right. We are not.
I know it's a symbolic representation, but I know. But I think you see where I'm going with this, and I get it. And this is why I also said that there's a bit of theater with society. I mean, I think that's an accepted fact.
My question to you was actually, what do you think about people having the liability of their decisions on their own head?
I think it just depends.
So like a cop who kills somebody, if they happen to kill George Floyd, they're in big trouble. But if there's most cops just being brutal like cops do, not all, but some, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, why do we got to talk about cops? You're gonna get me in trouble.
Well, we can talk about anything. What? So here, let's go back to the Department of something, the made-up Department of something. They make a decision. It doesn't matter. They make a decision, and it bankrupts 10 million people in the country because of a decision that they made. Mm-hmm. Those people have very little recourse. Yeah, and that person is nothing bad's going to happen to them. The worst thing that's going to happen to them is maybe they'll get fired. Maybe.
Yeah,
but they did something bad.
Yeah. No, I agree. Because the idea is, if you were following the rules and something out of negligence, happened, then I think there should be talk about something happening.
If you accidentally kill somebody, you might go to jail, even if it's an accident.
Right. And this is where I think that, like, I can't think of any examples, but we know obvious examples, right?
Right.
The George Floyd example. So this is obvious that we feel that, yes, I mean, Chauvin was responsible for that, and so he's paying the price. So it's obvious. I don't agree that there's in no settings should a governmental official be held responsible for an action that they did on behalf of the government. Mm-hmm. But I do think that they deserve a higher criteria of wrong than somebody in the private sector, because they do deserve. Well, they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. Everybody deserves an equal sort of, scrutiny, right? But yeah, I don't know. Okay,
so what if we take
we
it
might
to
have
a really
hit the end
silly
of my
place?
logic.
Right. So if we take it to something silly, Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility, right?
Well, no, I was thinking about like Fauci to talk about very.
Okay.
I'm taking. It
I was
there.
trying not to.
I know.
Fauci.
No. But I want to take it there because I think it's worth defending.
It's a tough case with Fauci because there can be argument as to whether he did good or something not good.
Well, and but it's a good example because human health is maybe one of the most complicated realms where there's an incredible amount of uncertainty, and you're sort of doing the best that you can, and you need a degree of understanding from people off of that.
I think that all makes sense as long as you do not have the power of mandate. So it's all I'm with you until it's like I can make you do something, and then it's like as soon as I'm your ward, it's like with your children. You have if something bad happens to your kid, that's ultimately you. If your kid does something bad in school, like all this stuff, it all comes to you. The buck stops with you because they are your ward. In the same way that as soon as you have the control to decide what I do, now you have way more on your head.
But is mandating ever, even David Friedman was talking about like the perfect society where you have just people that are naturally warlike and playing war games and stuff.
I mean, I'm not like a David Friedman.
No. I know that, but I'm just using an anarchist example as like even getting a culture like that to exist where you have people sort of training to be warriors so that if a outside aggressor ever attacked, you could spontaneously unite and then fight them off and then go back to being like separate entities, which is essentially what he was
right. It's sort
proposing.
of a silly idea, but yes.
Yeah, it's a silly idea. I
guess. So here's what's. I feel like we keep going back to this place of whether something is or isn't natural, and then it feels to me like that's a useless conversation. To me, I'm more curious about whether or not you think things are sort of as good as they can be, and if not, what's a way to make them better? I think a way to make things better is that people have more liability for the decisions that they make in the government.
I think I agree with that.
And I'm not saying totality. I'm not saying that you mess up and you get your head chopped off. Right. I'm saying like some kind of liability that is not distributed.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think more liability and more transparency is maybe also another key. And I guess let me just finish the defense of Fauci, I guess you could say. All I'm saying, though, is that there's an idea where you do, if you have rules that are laid out and somebody is doing everything within the bounds of those rules, that's, I think, why the question of how liable are they becomes more difficult to ask. It's not saying that they don't have any liability, but that's the question. If somebody was doing everything right, but there was still a degree of uncertainty in what was delegated to them, and in that uncertainty, they screwed up.
I think this makes perfect sense when you're a fry cook, and it makes very little sense when you're a CEO.
Well, and it's also that it becomes more complicated and potentially, I mean, it's just more complicated, and the outcomes of your decisions obviously affect way more people.
Right, and when you're the leader of the group and you lead your people into quicksand and you all die, that's your fault.
Right, which is why I was sort of getting at, if you look at monopoly as a very general principle of just like people consolidating under the banner of one thing, if you want to think about it, you're going to have that anywhere. And I just think given time, it will consolidate into one thing taking over everything and becoming the government. And
maybe.
I know, okay, I'll stop saying that. We keep getting back to that. You're right. Sorry. I'm sorry.
I say maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the idea of you need a revolution every 50 years or something.
But I actually agree with what you were saying of how, hey, what do you think we can... Yes, I think that things could be better. And I think that more liability should be put on. I think more individual responsibility is something that we should strive for. It's like in all of those, I'm actually very much...
Right.
I think we're on the same page.
Right. This is where the anarchists annoy me, is that it's sort of the let the perfect be the enemy of good kind of a thing. I would rather see things get better than see them get worse in the name of holding on to some principle.
Right. And and I don't know. And I do just wonder, there's also that oxymoron, hypocrisy, hypocritical aspect to it of like, if you wanted to implement any of these ideals, you would have to be coercive.
Right. Well,
you wouldn't have to be, but yes, like you could also, I guess the idea is be persuasive. That's, I suppose.
I mean, if you run for government and you say, here's what I'm going to do. As soon as I get in office, I'm going to eliminate the government. And people vote for you. That's not really that who are you coercing?
Yeah, no, it's more of, you're right. Yeah. No.
If you say what you're going to do and then people vote for that, even if you say, I'm going to get in, I'm going to lock the whole country down, and we're going to become like a totalitarian state, and people vote for you, that's not even like, it's kind of coercive, but it's also kind of not.
Right. I agree with that. I guess to sum up David Friedman's stuff real quick. I mean, he, as you said, he's like addressing two questions that we have, one of which is, can a society defend themselves, an anarchist society defend themselves? Because I do think that is sort of one of my definite... I think maybe when you were saying somebody... I think I brought this up as a reason for why people consolidate. And the funny thing is he sort of starts by saying, in some ultimate sense, nothing can prevent that populace from basically possessing arms and willingly, if necessary, to use them. So
see, he kind of dismisses that. I actually think that is the strongest way for a population to defend themselves. And I think we even see it with the U.S. government. I mean, think about how long we were in Afghanistan, and we didn't make a whole lot of headway. Same thing in Vietnam. Right. When you have an unorganized armed population, that is a very difficult population to dominate.
Yes. Yeah, no, I don't think he dismisses it. I think that's his central point.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, or at least that's what I got.
Right.
Yeah, which I think is agree. I just think the way he phrased it was kind of funny, because it's like the rights enforcement agency will have a large fraction of the armed might of the society. What can prevent them from getting together and using that might to set themselves up as a government? In some ultimate sense, nothing. I just like that.
So David does not have the way of words of his father, unfortunately. His dad is so fun to read. I love reading Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
He's just got such a way with words. He reminds me so much of Stephen Dembski.
Yeah.
He's just a fun dude.
Yes, I could see that, actually. Yeah, I could see that.
He's witty. He makes jokes. It's great.
Yeah, but again, I felt like all of his arguments fell back to the idea that you needed to have lots of competition, and what's to stop a monopoly from forming when there's no central monopoly, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
You need to fight one monopoly with another, Antushka.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of possible names for this.
Yeah, I feel like actually what could be interesting, not next, but sometime in the future, is to read about the history of the westward expansion. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we could do it from different perspectives too. I know Milton Friedman writes about this, and Rockefeller and the robber barons and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'd be down to read some Milton Friedman.
Yeah, I mean, so that could be interesting in the future. Okay, so what are we doing next? We got move away from this.
Yeah, so I was I will say though, just as a cabinet, I enjoyed reading it.
Nice.
I hope I didn't come off too curmudgeon-y. I mean, I'm sure I did, but I didn't mean to. Well,
I feel like I'm the curmudgeon. I'm the one who's saying we got to get rid of society.
Is that what you're saying though? Because I felt like when I
kept not society, just the government.
You had issue with that.
You're right. As I said it, I was like, that was a bad way of phrasing that.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm glad that you realize the error. No, I'm just kidding. No. But I enjoyed it. And you know, like I said, I think I agree with a lot of points that were made as I was going through Rothbard. It's just maybe some of the practical points of where I just feel like it's semantic too. What are you calling the government? Okay. So I'll say that. That's all I'll say. Okay. So I was initially thinking Dioscorides, however you pronounce his name, but I don't know. So Machiavellian's The Defender of Freedom was what I suggested to you.
Right.
And
by James Burnham?
Yes.
Nice.
So he was like the godfather of, I guess, the conservatives. He was like William Buckley Jr.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Yeah. The droll.
Right. Am I going to hate this book?
You might.
Okay.
You might. You might also kind of find it funny because he's, you know, I mean, the title itself is sort of funny, right? You know, Machiavellian's The Defender of Freedom, right? That's not, you wouldn't necessarily think of that.
I mean, in a way, it's sort of Friedman-esque about, you know, like pursuing your own interests is the most, like, moral thing you can do. Right.
But I guess the central point is that Machiavelli, like these other people who were Machiavelli in spirit, the spirit is that they were looking at things objectively just as they were.
Nice.
That's really what connects them. But they're talking about society and oligarchy. And so I think you're going to like it. Actually, let me grab the book because we should talk about what to read next. Yes. Hang on. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'll cut all that out. Okay. Don't worry. So it starts with Dante, then he goes to Machiavelli.
Mosca.
Yeah, so I think if we do Dante, and if you want to try to do as much of Machiavelli as you can.
How long are these? Because actually, the other thing I was about to say is I think we need to pare down a little bit.
Oh yeah, we can pare down.
The last 2 weeks have been very difficult for me.
Okay, let's just do Dante. That's 20 pages.
I'm also happy to do more episodes on a book if we want to or if we need to. We don't always have to do 3.
That's true. Maybe we should do that too.
Yeah.
We might want to do that because it's probably worth, unless we feel like I guess we'll just play it by ear if we feel like we're going over the same stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll do Dante.
All right. So it's about, like 35 pages or so?
No, it's like 20 pages. I think.
Okay, cool.
Well, maybe it's longer. Sorry.
It's fine. I think that's fine. I just think I can't do 2 of those.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and he honestly is kind of... he's kind of a dry read.
Uh-oh. Oh.
Yeah, sorry. We'll see. We'll see what you think.
Cool. No, I'm excited. This sounds cool. Maybe.
So,
like the theory of the ruling class. I see that, and then I'm immediately like, what the hell?
So I guess I should just say it outright.
Yeah.
So this is a Curtis Yarvin book.
Okay.
This is something he talks about this a lot.
Nice.
So that's how I heard about it.
Okay. Nice.
And I think you'll when you read it, you'll be like, oh, okay, I can see why he would like this.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think again it adds interesting context. I don't agree with everything in it, but I think it raises good points, and it raises good points that I was sort of making of like the idea of maybe there does feel like there are these natural laws of like oligarchy and stuff like that.
Nice.
Not to say that we should be content with them and that we shouldn't have forces that sort of operate to try to break them up, but
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to get off of arguing about anarchism.
Yeah, sorry. I hope you don't hate me.
I don't hate.
Well,
I don't hate you. It's nowhere near the worst conversation I've ever had about anarchism.
Oh, well, that's good.
Some people get so mad at me.
What does Mrs. Antushka think?
She hates it.
Yeah.
I think actually you and she are pretty aligned on like your perspective on this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because we're just sane, Antushka.
Right.
No, just kidding. Just joking.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, honestly, I think we're aligned on a lot of things. I mean, it's just the dissolution of the government completely that I just can't. I just like, yeah. I mean, and okay, we can end on this, but like, do you see it as a slow process? Like, do you see this as something that would be achieved in our lifetime?
I think I can't possibly imagine how that would happen.
See, this is where I think I'm sort of an anarchist. I will give you a little bit as we end this. Mm-hmm. Don't clip that. But in time, like I do believe that the ideal system would be one with the least amount of like regulation. Mm-hmm. It's just how you would achieve that, I don't know, and what that society, what the living standards of that society are. I also I can't say that they would be good. I have a feeling that they wouldn't be good. In fact, so yeah.
Well, then why do you want that?
Well, I shouldn't say that. I have a fear that they wouldn't be good.
I see.
But I like to think that they would be. Mm-hmm. That the natural progression of a rational people is a one without government because they're able to govern themselves.
Right.
But I don't know.
That'd be cool. All right. Nice. Don't clip that. All right. I won't. Clip
okay,
that.
Good.
It wasn't very funny, so it's not good to clip it.
Yeah, what are you going to clip? The Monopoly?
I don't know. I always try and find things that where we're sort of laughing because I feel like it draws people in.
I think that's a good idea.
But the last few, we haven't been laughing a whole lot.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I don't know. Seems like the Spooner one clip did well. Okay.
Did it?
I don't know. I think it did okay.
Yeah. Cool.
But yeah, I was just thinking I could also listen through. I wasn't really listening for clippable things, but I can. And
I mean, if you find anything, but it's fine. I'll do that.
Okay. Yeah. If I find something, I'll mention it. But
all right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we're gonna read about Dante.
Yep.
Nice.
Did you ever read Dante's Inferno?
No, I've never read it. I know about it, and I spent time in Dante Piazza in Florence.
Oh, that's right. You did that trip. I forgot about that.
Dude, it's crazy. Like, there's the statue of him, and it's like the whole thing's about Dante right there.
Yeah, they love Dante.
Dante's huge.
Dante was cool.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool. All right.
Sounds good. See ya.